The Edemic Covenant by Nicholas, Remy, and Ethan. Welcome to our presentation on the Edemic Covenant. It tells a story on God and humankind. Through this covenant, we can see how sin has entered the world, but also God's mercy and plan for salvation began. The Edemic Covenant is God's promise to Adam after he and Eve sinned in the Garden of Eden. It explains the consequences of sin, pain, hard work, and death, but also includes God's first promise of a future Savior who would defeat evil.
The book of the Adamic Covenant starts on Genesis chapter 3, verse 1 to 13 in the Bible. Genesis chapter 3, verse 1 says, "The serpent was the most cunning of all the animals that the Lord has made. He asked the woman, 'Did God really say, you shall not eat from any fruit of the trees on the garden?' The serpent had attempted to influence Eve to eat the forbidden fruit from the tree of knowledge. She had eaten from it and gave some to Adam. At that moment, sin had entered the world." Genesis chapter 3, verse 7. The eyes of both of them were open, and they realized that they were naked. So they sewed leaves unto them and made loincloths for themselves. When God had called them, Adam and Eve were hiding, scared and in shame. God had questioned them, and their disobedience was shown. Humanity's relationship with God had been broken.
After Adam and Eve listened to the serpent, God tells them the consequences for their actions, but also tells a promise to them. Then the Lord said to the serpent, "Because you have done this, curse you among all animals. I'll put an enmity between you and women, and between your offspring and hers. They will strike at your head while you strike at their heel." Genesis 3:15 is known as the Prevangelium. It is the first promise that God makes in the Bible that eventually leads the child of the woman, or Jesus Christ, will overcome evil. "By the sweat of your brow you shall eat bread, until you return to the ground from which you were taken." God speaks to Adam and Eve, says that they will suffer, do hard work, and die. But he also gives them clothing and sends them out of Eden. This shows that even when they have sinned, he also loves them and cares for them.
Who is involved in this covenant? This covenant involves God, Adam, and Eve. They represent all of humanity. God speaks directly to them by laying out the consequences for sin and the promise of future salvation.
The Adamic covenant is meaningful because it shows the origin of sin and how it started, and how God's mercy for us. Even though the first two humans had disobeyed God, God has not abandoned them. Yet instead he began his plan to save this sinful world through his only Son, Jesus Christ. Is the covenant still operative today? Yes, the Adamic covenant is still spiritually present today. The promise of a Savior had continued through Jesus Christ, who is sometimes known as the New Adam. As told by the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops, from the beginning God had promised redemption through his one and only Son, Jesus Christ, who will restore humanity's relationship with him. This teaching shows that what began in Genesis is still fulfilled in the church today. This teaching explains what began in Genesis is what is still fulfilled in the church today.
Lastly, in the Edemic covenant, it reveals both God, justice, and mercy. Adam and Eve sinned in the end, but God promised a Savior to defeat evil and restore life. This covenant reminds us that even when we fall, God will never stop loving us. Through Jesus Christ, the promise of the Edemic covenant is completed.